You know, another major part of Hitchens' book has to do with arguments for God's existence. Hitchens' basic argument is God is a hypothesis that we do not need, that natural events can be explained through natural causality. He invokes, ironically enough, William of Occam, who was a medieval friar, and his famous principle, Occam's razor. He said, when confronted with a variety of explanations for a given phenomenon, always prefer the simplest explanation. That's a good principle. Occam said, don't multiply entities unnecessarily. He meant, don't look for elaborate causes when a very simple explanation suffices. Hitchens applies Occam's razor to many of the arguments for God's existence. God is a hypothesis that we do not require. We can explain natural phenomena, we can explain the world as a whole through natural causality. I would suggest that what's going on here is a sort of category error, and it's an error made by an awful lot of the atheists. The tendency to think of God as one competing cause among many. God as one cause within the context of mechanistic causes. Let me give you an example. If you were to say, why is the weather the way it is today? So it's a cloudy, overcast day. Why is it this way? You'd say, well, it's moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, it's the way the winds are going, it's the buckling of the jet stream, and we mention all sorts of factors. And we say, well, that's an adequate explanation for the way the weather is. What wouldn't you say? You're a religious person. You wouldn't say, well, the weather's this way because the buckling of the jet stream, because moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, because of God, and because of the way the winds are blowing. Well, see, we'd smile at that because God is not one of the competing causes among many. From a mechanistic standpoint, we have sufficiently explained the weather by appealing to all these causes. We don't need to invoke God. That's true. Another example. How do you make a cherry pie? Well, you need cherries, you need starch, you need sugar, you need flour and water and the heat of the oven and the skill of the baker. Yeah, okay, that explains the cherry pie. What wouldn't a religious person say? How do you make a cherry pie? Well, you need cherries and water and God and starch and... Well, no, that's a category mistake, as though God is one of the causes among many that produces an effect. Who is God? God is not what corresponds to that kind of question, but rather to this kind of question. Why is there something rather than nothing? That's Heidegger's question. It's a philosophical question in his version. But that's fundamentally a religious question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there this whole nexus of finite causes at all? Why are there cherries, starch, sugar, water, heat of the oven, skill of the baker at all? Why is there a world at all? Now that's a religious question. Can a Christian believe in the Big Bang? Absolutely. In a certain way, that's just an open question. How do the scientists work out the details of how the universe evolved mechanistically? Sure, this theory, this approach, that approach. In a certain way, the religious person can remain very indifferent to all that. Creation is not getting at the mechanism of how things evolve and how things relate to each other. Creation is happening now. Creation is the event by which God, here and now, is giving rise to the totality of the universe and sustaining it in existence. No one's going to claim that the book of Genesis is scientific cosmology. It's a theological meditation on the fact of creation. So again, that's a category mistake. If we read the book of Genesis as straightforward cosmology, we have the Big Bang and you have the Genesis. That's apples and oranges. It's simply comparing apples and oranges. And that's a mistake that the atheists will often make in their biblical interpretation. Now, why should this world, which does not contain within itself the reason for its own being, why should it exist? That's the level where we're getting at the existence of God. When religious people talk about proofs for God's existence, they're not looking at mechanistic demonstrations. They're saying the world as a totality is contingent. It's non-self-explanatory. And therefore it points finally toward that which does exist through itself. I am who I am. The God who's not a being among many, but the sheer act of being itself. Now, we can argue about this. Philosophers and theologians have argued about it for centuries, but we won't even get off the ground if we make the category mistake that so many of the atheists make, that God is one being among many. That's what God is not. Can we apply Occam's razor? Sure, we should. You don't invoke God as one cause among many to explain the weather or the evolution of species or cherry pies. I think once we make that move, we can have a better argument about God's existence.